Welcome, Colonel Vindman. How are you? Are you hearing us?
I hear you loud and clear. I'm here.
Excellent, great. We're waiting for John Spencer and Mikey K. All right, this is great. Thanks so much. Welcome everyone to the panel. As uh, as we were just saying earlier, we've been doing this for about 70 plus days since before the invasion, and 24 hours, 7 days a week. We are definitely glad to have you here, and we are going to kick off. Uh, Colonel John Spencer will be here momentarily, and so in the meantime, we will start. So, welcome to the Walter Report, and thank you in general for your continued support of our space, and in specific for Mriya Aid. For those of you who don't know us, Mriya Aid is a newly minted NGO formed in North America. It's dedicated to assisting and helping the preservation of Ukrainian society, sovereignty, and democracy. We're a diverse group of professionals from many disparate fields: military, government, logistics, IT, journalism, procurement, and fundraising. However, we all have one common goal, and that is to support Ukraine and defend her democracy. Today, Ukraine is under attack by Russia. This is Putin's war of choice, and it's on people of Ukraine and its democracy. With us right now on our panel, we have special guest Alexander Vindman, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army retired. He's a New York Times bestseller, and here, Right Matters. Former Director of the European Affairs for U.S. National Security Council. You might know who he is. You might recognize the name. Very, very happy to have you here. And we have just going to mute all those mics. In addition, we've also got Colonel John Spencer will be joining us shortly. I'll introduce him when he's there. We also have Major Jason Giroux. He is a fellow Canadian officer. He's a military historian, urban operations instructor, urban warfare specialist, and historian. And full disclosure, although I'm not a journalist, but I'm playing one on Twitter, he was a directing staff of mine and a mentor. Very pleased to have him here. Thank you so much for being here. And we also have Michael Kay, who is a war studies expert. Michael spent 20 years as an assault helicopter pilot in the Royal Air Force, and he served several operational tours around the world. Not only is he our resident air component subject matter expert, he's also a joint operations expert, and we're glad to have you here all today. We will wait for Colonel Spencer to come back, and in the meantime, I want to kick off the question to Colonel Vindman. We have hundreds of questions have come in, actually, so we've had to pick the best ones. Um, in a nutshell, or in your words, what would you say? How would you define or assess the last 70 days? What Putin has done? What's going on now, or what you see the future might hold? Bit of a softball, but I just want to. I would like if you could explain to our audience what your assessment on the current situation is. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to be able to participate and maybe draw some attention from Mriya Aid and the good work you're doing to get weapons, non-lethal weapons, and support systems into Ukraine. Very, very important, and frankly, probably in a lot of ways, an important factor in the tactical successes of the Ukrainian armed forces over the course of this war. I won't spend a huge amount of time talking about the entirety of the war to this point. There have been a lot of interesting facets from somebody that served in. I could say that because I could take a step back and take a little bit of a sterile view, having served 21 and a half years in the military. Wrote the strategy for how the U.S. military was going to compete, contend with Russia. Uh, the biggest surprises were, of course, that the massive way in which the Russian armed forces underperformed in every way, everything kind of from fundamental leadership, um, combined arms tactics, basic proficiencies, use of air power, all these operational concepts of how to integrate electronic warfare and cyber and air power. Almost none of that really materialized. Maybe a little bit coming to bear in this later phase in the Donbass. And at the same time, the Ukrainian is performing masterfully. A lot of the hard work at the tactical level, just watching the footage of some of these ambushes, they performed extremely well. extremely effective use of fires. Um, that's kind of the overarching theme of overperformance by the Ukrainians in a and that's an understatement, if anything, if there is one. And then the drastic way the Russians have underperformed. That certainly was the story for the first 6 weeks of the war. The Russians were very, very slow to learn the lessons and took a punishing toll with regards to combat losses, weapon systems, personnel, thousands and thousands of losses. And then a much more acute, in my view, a more dangerous phase of the war where Russia had more limited objectives, gains in the east, potentially as a condition setting for a protracted war and maybe even a return to Kiev at some point down the road, but relying on some short-term successes in the east. And that's been the part of the campaign that's been unfolding over the past 2 weeks. And again, massively underperforming. Russia has really not made any significant gains. Even its claimed gains in Mariupol have been largely kind of rhetorical flourishes about having seized the town, even though thousands of fighters still remain in this fortress of Azov steel. And Russia, in conducting this offensive, is really breaking the remainder of its armed forces against Ukraine. That's fighting a very, very sharp, well considered mobile defense in depth for that matter, giving ground when they need to, punish, but doing that after they've significantly punished the Russian armed forces, um, and really not being able to achieve a breakthrough to the point where about 2 weeks into this offensive, and just days before kind of what must have been an important mark on the wall for the Russians, May 9th, uh, it looks like the Russian forces are about to culminate, and it looks like the Ukrainians are positioned to counterattack. As a matter of fact, I think there is a good chance that they will counterattack in the course of the next several days, in time for May 9th, and that sends a very powerful message to the Russians, that this will not be remembered as a day of victory for Russia.
Thank you for that. As you know, Mriya Aid, a lot of the principals here were former task force commanders of the NATO Mission Op Unifier for Canada, and as you know, America and the Ukraine had, pardon me, and the UK had one as well. There are many questions about your opinion as to the efficacy of that training for the last 8 years. If Colonel Lake was on here, Melanie Lake, she's the first to tell you and be very modest and say, you know what, we learned just as much from them as they did us. They were supremely impressed by their commitment to training. What impact do you think, or can you speak to about that training?
Sure. So I'll tell you that most of my experience from 2014 on was either forward in Moscow, or at the strategic level in the Pentagon and in the White House. So I had a chance to, kind of peek in on the training missions that we had, kind of certainly monitor what was going on, and read quite a few of the reports of outputs. And the people that were participating in these exercises and the people that were hands on certainly didn't miss that there was an enormous amount that we could learn from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians on the ground were really developing and honing their skills, their infantry skills, their armor skills, the ability to bring fires to the battlefield with a great deal of precision. That's actually one of the amazing components of this war for Ukraine, is that they've been very, very effective with their artillery. But I don't know if I could. I mean, I guess I can't necessarily speak to um, kind of an on the ground feel. I know that this is important feature. It certainly accounts for why the Ukrainian military has, in a lot of ways, performed so well. They built over the course of the past 8 years an NCO core. They've trained on the exact kind of skills that they're using in these battles. But I could also tell you that there's another story here, and that's a story that the big army, the big army machine, didn't learn those lessons broadly. Those lessons that the Ukrainians were offering, the fact that there was a lot to understand from the way that Ukrainians were contending with Russian forces in the joint security area. Um, that didn't really translate to the big army. I mean, you have to be paying attention to really understand. And I think most of the army didn't understand, and that's why we had this kind of fatalist, defeatist attitude in the beginning of the war that Ukraine was going to be rolled over really quickly. I didn't have that because I wasn't on the ground, and it's an important thing to be on the ground to watch these things unfold. I hadn't been on the ground in a long time. I served in Kiev in 2009, 2010, before this war, and served in Moscow for 3 years. I knew there was more to the story. I kind of wrote about this as a long war, that there was going to be more than just kind of looking at the tables and seeing uh, this overwhelming superiority by the Russians with regards to advanced capabilities, maybe some concepts, operational designs, and things of that nature. Uh, but that didn't resonate with me. I knew that there was more to the story. I thought there'd be subjective factors like morale would end up playing maybe in some subtle way. I can't claim to have a forecast how well that the Ukrainians were going to do. The best I did was manage to identify that the Russians were going to be kind of absurd with their maximalist aims, and wrote an article basically laying out how the beginning of this war unfolded, and the fact that it was almost certainly likely to be a long war, and the longer it goes, the more dangerous it's likely to get for NATO.
Thank you. We have Major Giroux. He's an urban warfare specialist in Canada here, and good friends with John Spencer. I'm wondering, he had some essay or dialed into a lot of those who trained Ukrainian forces. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, sir, Major Giroux?
Well, I mean, I'll just be repeating. Well, first, I'd be quite remiss if I didn't say good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for sharing your time with us tonight, and thanks for having me on the program. And very happy to be part of this panel here. But I would say that I'll repeat what I said the other night. I didn't serve in Ukraine, although I had many friends who served on Operation Unifier, which was our advisory operation to Ukraine. And like I said the other night, these ladies and gentlemen are so motivated and so dedicated, with a great sense of humor as well. That as Colonel Lake said before, it's I mean, we can learn just as much from them as they can from us, and so that's all I have to add. So, really, is it a surprise that the Russians are doing so poorly and the Ukrainians are doing so well? No, not really. I mean, they're fighting for their lives and they're fighting for their freedom. So, of course, they are extremely motivated. But that's all I would really ask. That's what I would.
Well,
Hey,
well,
Joe,
I'd like to.
one thing that I'd like to add to this discussion. Today was tweeting and made a tweet, kind of hitting the New York Times for their kind of silly title, saying that the U.S. Kind of was responsible or enabled the strikes on the generals, uh, being able to knock out so many of Russia's generals in this war. Part of this part of this story, and we shouldn't forget it, is that the U.S. and the West played a important enabling role. We provided support to get this army to where it was with some training, and we played a supporting role with regards to equipping this force. But we shouldn't overstate our component in this. It is entirely the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian soldiers, the Ukrainian intelligence officers, the Ukrainian people that are responsible for this victory. There's a great deal of hubris in claiming that it was U.S. intelligence that was instrumental in knocking out these generals, or U.S. intelligence was instrumental in knocking out the Moskva. And it really bothers me because it offends my notion of kind of justice, that these people that have been fighting so hard, in fact, and sacrificing so much, that our kind of hubris and our sense of self, we feel an urge to take some credit for what we're doing when we really are. We played a supporting role. We played a supporting role with regard to providing some equipment, some advice, but it's the Ukrainians that are doing this. And I really feel it's important to make sure that credit is given where it's due.
Thank you for that. Actually, I just want to take the opportunity to welcome our other panelists here. Well, it's Colonel John Spencer. He is the chair of the Urban Warfare Studies, and he works at the Madison Policy Forum. Teaches at West Point. Longtime contributor. We love your presence here. Thank you so much for joining us, John. And then also we have Colonel Melanie Lake. She's a former task force commander off Unifier. She's one of the individuals, Colonel Vindman, that I was telling you about. She has a lot to say about them and their efficacy. I'd like to all introduce you. If you wanted to address Colonel Lake, ma'am, if you want to address what I was just speaking to Colonel Vindman about the two-way traffic of knowledge, information, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Alex. Very nice to meet you. I couldn't agree more with what you just said there. Early on, at the onset of just after 24th of February, every time I was speaking, either in an interview or a think tank, one of the first questions we always got was, how did the NATO training contribute to what we're seeing on the ground right now? And I got a lot of feedback very quickly from theater saying that that narrative was really going over poorly, because so much. I mean, the mission, all of the NATO missions, I think, were a great success, but it really was because it was a partnership. We were learning as much from them as they were learning from us, and above and beyond that, I mean, there are so many things that we're seeing play out in the battle space right now that they had to learn on their own. There were many aspects of warfare that we simply didn't have the capacity to teach, didn't have the personnel there to do, and they have done a masterful job over the last 7 years, 8 years of institutionalizing all the lessons that they were learning in the Donbass, of getting the right leaders moving up the chain who had already proven themselves in the fight. And I completely echo the sentiment that the credit belongs entirely to them. And I think there are very few people who should be looking to take credit for what we're seeing on the ground right now who are not on the ground right now.
Thank you for that, John. Did you want to? I wanted there are other questions in specific. I wouldn't mind Colonel Vindman to just post you right now because I know you're on a time crunch. What people are very curious about your knowledge of General Gerasimov. Apparently, you've met him. What's the significance of him being where he is? Is there anything you could speak to about that?
Sure. It's strangely enough, I'll tell you, before this war, I served in Moscow for 3 years. I had fluent Russian capabilities, and found myself basically being the guy talking, either facilitating conversations or talking to a lot of Russian um, military security service officers. So I had a chance to interact with General Gerasimov on at least a half a dozen occasions in country, and then afterwards as on the chairman of the Joint Chiefs Staff, uh, facilitating those dialogues, translating for conversations with Gerasimov when U.S. cruise missiles were striking bases in Syria occupied by Russian soldiers. Those are some interesting conversations. And those bilateral meetings, there were a couple of bilateral meetings that then General Dunford had with Gerasimov, and I found him to be to come across as a competent, professional officer. I mean, he's in the Russian military. He's part of the Russian security apparatus, so he's subject to the same kinds of influences and same kinds of considerations, with maybe a more callous, dismissive nature towards soldiers, and I mean, it's just the product of the system. But I did find him to be competent and thoughtful. He didn't drink. He was a bit of a teetotaler. Didn't tolerate military officers that didn't. And I really expected him to kind of breed an officer corps that was like him. Showed a similar kind of competence. All that's to say that there's a huge gap between well-practiced Russian military leadership that studies the art of war and how that translates to the ground. And that gap, it's a chasm really, in which they're not able to train a force to actually to perform effectively in battle. They don't have the structure with the lack of NCO corps. They don't have the kinds of they don't train their officer corps in the same kind of way with with initiative and they're just simply not able to piece all the capabilities together into a tapestry, into combined arms warfare. But I thought from a kind of a one-on-one engagement, he seemed to come across as rather competent. And I guess I have some I might need to reevaluate some of the conclusions I had based on this war. But I'm surprised on that basis that they weren't able to learn from mistakes and perform more effectively in combat.
Okay, so would you say that NATO Ukraine has to watch out for him, or all right, I kind of hear you saying that because he might not have the type of individuals around him, or he hasn't trained his replacement, as we say in our armies, and combined with the doctrine that is obviously outdated. Is it more of the same? Will he make an impact?
Well, I mean, he's the chief of the general staff. He's the overall command of all the forces. It's unclear whether he's taken operational command of this particular campaign. That doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense to me. You'd want the army commanders, the folks that have been working with their staff, conducting that. So Dvornikov, the Southern Military District Commander, potentially running this fight. It's to me, his visit maybe suggests more that he was providing an independent evaluation of the possibilities of success, was probably providing some general direction, strategic direction, and communicating expectations from the Minister of Defense Shoigu and President Putin. But I think these are dangerous folks. They've spent decades honing the skills for war. There was some fatally flawed assumptions about the battle plan in the first place, based on the notion that the Ukrainians would surrender, that the Ukrainians wouldn't put up a fight. And I think a lot of those are driven by the political class, by Vladimir Putin, his chauvinism. But I think they're still dangerous and they shouldn't be underestimated. But the Ukrainians understand this, and they're looking for these kinds of vulnerabilities. They're looking to exploit the tactical ineptitude of the Russian military, the inability to bring to bear air power, artillery, and maneuver together. But we shouldn't think this is yet a done deal. It's not done until the Russians are pushed across their border. Although to me, it's pretty clear that they're not going to be able to win even this more limited campaign across a 900-mile frontage, a 900-kilometer frontage.
So combined with, as you said, many people poo-pooed, the Ukrainian military and probably overestimated the Russian military. Now that the Russians have underwhelmed the world and the Ukrainians have, achieved the impossible, apparently, there's this belief that with all of NATO and the EU supporting Ukraine, that there's no going back. What does that mean, that there's no going back? They're invested. The United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin made a comment. Moving heaven and earth. Obviously, it was quite powerful statement from a Secretary of Defense. What does that practically mean? Does that mean that the Americans won't, like, it's done? It's done. They're all are they all in?
I wouldn't go that far. I think the flowery rhetoric of moving heaven and earth and doing everything we can to support. There's a couple of decades of policy inertia and strategic missteps around Russia and perceptions of how far Russia is willing to go towards nuclear war, how likely they are to escalate to conventional and nuclear exchange that cause our policy-making community and probably the military to take a long pause, be very, very deliberate about what we're prepared to provide, not offer Ukraine kind of long-range strike capabilities, the things that are actually these heavy weapons that are coming in are critically important. They'll replenish the losses that the Ukrainians suffered in these previous 8 weeks of war, more than 8 weeks of war. They'll provide Ukraine with probably an advantage in terms of artillery and fires, but the Russians still have long-range fires. They still have the Iskander missile batteries. They still have air power and helicopters in vastly greater numbers, and we're still reluctant to provide those kinds of capabilities. So I think we're moving in the right direction. We were past these absurd discussions about lethal aid, whether it has to be defensive lethal aid, all that kind of nonsensical, diplomatic speak. We're past, the conversation about armor and artillery, but we're still not prepared to go all in and get Ukraine what they need to destroy Russia's ability to sustain war. Because even if Russia Russia's ground forces are destroyed, they're broken against the Ukrainian ground forces, against the Ukrainian armed forces. Russia still has those fires, and it could still attempt to destroy Ukrainian cities and punish the Ukrainian population. When we're going to get there, the problem is it's going to take a long time, and there's going to be more casualties. But we haven't shifted our mentality yet on who we want to win, how that Russia needs to suffer a strategic defeat, that Ukraine needs to win, simply.
So I'm not going to ask you what the trigger would be for that, because I'm sure you'll say you don't know exactly. But for those watching on the sidelines, what would be the evidence that the trigger has been made? What would the West, the United States, actually give to Ukraine to have that capability, the real long range?
Yeah, so I mean, this war is very, very unique. It's the first social media war. There's never been a war that's played out kind of in the information space. Everything is happening pretty much real time. So in reality, we would know really, really quickly that these capabilities have started to show up. We would know either by the fact that there would be pictures taken of convoys of equipment kind of arriving, of departing, bases in Europe or arriving in Ukraine. We'd see them on the battlefield. We'd see something about their effects. That's why this notion that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we're not seeing just kind of feels it's a misplaced idea that there's a lot that we're not seeing. There's some things that we're not seeing, but I don't think there's a lot that we're not seeing, just because of the nature of this war.
Okay, and from the collated from the room and from the few days here of people sending in questions, a lot of people are making hay of 9th of May. What does it mean? Does it mean there's going to be a full mobilization? There's going to be an armistice. There's going to be whatever. Do you have any insight on that? What could that mean?
Sure.
Where are we going?
Yep. So I've been thinking about this for a little while. I think it is an important mark on the wall. May 9th has a legacy going back to 1945, much celebrated in the Soviet Union, and really, in a lot of ways, rejuvenated under Putin to kind of recapture the glory of Russia. So there's going to be some consistency where we see the parade planning already now with regards to kind of the pageantry. But this one's likely to have a policy component too. There's likely to be something, some sort of announcement. There are some theories that there could be an announcement of general mobilization. I frankly find that a little bit hard to believe that a war that's gone as poorly as it has, with the diametrically opposed claims in Russia that victory is around the corner, that it's going to be that easy to just bite the bullet and say we're actually not winning, we need a mobilization in order to defeat Ukraine. These like backwoods, little Russians. That's going to come with costs. The long-term costs are also not negligible. That means a larger swath of the population has to send their fathers, sons, husbands, brothers to war, and with many of them coming back as casualties. And that's something that the Russian general staff, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the political class has to be thinking about. I think that if this last part of the campaign had gone better, these past 2 weeks had gone better, and Russia had some meaningful gains, seizing Mariupol, pushing out to the boundaries of Luhansk and Donetsk, seizing Kherson, Zaporozhye, basically making major gains. I think in success, I would have probably expected to see maybe some sort of partial mobilization to press to victory. Now, I think that given the fact that the prospects are so poor, that the pressure from sanctions is only going to increase with a oil and gas embargo of sorts. It's really going to be a price control on how much revenue goes back to Russia. With the fact that the U.S. has signaled it will spend Russia into the ground, this $33 billion in aid amounts to half of Russia's annual defense budget. In total, as an alliance, we've probably spent about as much as Russia spends in a year, with easily more coming. So I think with all these types of headwinds, I would expect that Putin, who I assess to be a rational actor, highly opportunistic, thought that this was going to be easy, that he could, when it wasn't, that he could pressure his way out of it, saber rattle his way out of it. He's going to try to. He may very well consider discretion being the better part of valor and fighting another day, declaring victory like he did in Mariupol, attempting to keep some of the gains, especially the land bridge. But it's hard for me to imagine. We'll see in about, I guess, 4 days. It's hard for me to imagine that he's going to press towards a general mobilization. If he does, I think we as NATO, the democratic world, are in for a painful, long war in which there's an increasing chance of NATO involvement.
All right. So, I mean, the inverse of that, people would say, they suspect he hasn't been acting rationally, or the results of his decisions haven't turned out so well. But
Right.
we're going to go to the panel. I think Mikey had a question, and he's former wing commander, and Colonel Lake. So, we'll go with Mikey first, and then Colonel Lake. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Yehuda. And just before I get to, I've got a couple of questions for Alex, actually. I just want to say a huge thank you to Walter and Yehuda for having me up on this very experienced panel of speakers. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to sort of relate some of the experience and knowledge through 20 years of many, many combat tools. The one specifically that has allowed me to analyze so much within this Twitter space is the prelim operations did in the campaign planning of the British inroad into Helmand Province. And part of that role was being the J35, which is the operations planner in charge of the SF operations that were going on inside before the British troops ever got there. And this is one of the big discussions that goes on. And Alex, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I'm curious because there's a couple of questions from this. There's a lot that goes on under the SF component in terms of SNR and SNI, surveillance and reconnaissance, and support and influence, non-kinetic operations that are absolutely critical in forming the IPB. And the panel will know what the IPB is, but for those that are listening in, it's the intelligence preparation of the battle space. And this is an absolutely critical role that SF do outside of the kinetic operations. We also know, through my experience, that isn't reported on, that is going on, the role that SF are conducting at the moment. And I think what's incredibly important to annotate, and it goes to your point, Alex, on, and it's what I've always been saying, is that this this counter to Russian invasion of Ukraine is a war that has been conducted like no other war because of the globalization and the digital component. But so far, under the SF bit, that aspect has been pretty much been separated from the media, and I'm very happy with that because that is a critical part of the operations that are going on at the moment. My first question to you, Alex, is given the fact that you're in European affairs on the National Security Council, is there anything in your experience that NATO or the West could have done in the lead up to Putin deciding to invade Ukraine to prevent him from doing so? Because I personally, and I'm a regular analyst on BBC, I was surprised that he actually made the move to commit to the invasion, given all of the political, economic, and the security headwinds that he would be facing. So the first question for you, Alex, is did the invasion surprise you, and is there anything that the West could have done to have prevented that?
Yep. So thanks, Mickey. It's good to meet you too. No, it didn't surprise me. Back in November of 2021, I was doing some press, and I started going on the record saying that this war is coming, and there's little to be done to avoid it. And then in December, I wrote something for the New York Times saying that if this war is all but certain to happen, even if we do a full court press to avoid it, but at least we should try to do that full court press to avoid it, because the day after shots are fired, missiles are launched, it becomes increasingly complex, and it implicates European security, U.S. security, and potentially sets us on a condition where, if Ukraine lost, the democratic world would be under siege. So it didn't surprise me, and it's, I guess, partially because I've spent such a huge amount of time focused on Russia and understood that the signals, everything from this massive, unprecedented force buildup to the rhetoric that Vladimir Putin was using, these missives that he's 5,000 word missives he was writing about his view of the world, his view of Ukraine. All of that kind of pointed in the direction of the war. I remember being on NPR, and Mary Louise Kelly asked me this question, and she said, where would you place it? I said it's 8 out of 10 in the beginning of January that was going to happen. But I thought that we could have at least tried to do more, and we didn't do anything. We were almost entirely reactive. And the prescription that I kind of called for at that moment was graduated response options with regards to sanctions. Russia was already belligerent by positioning its forces, warranting some sanctions, signaling that more sanctions would come, and indicating that there would be a cost. I thought that we could have done more with regards to posture changes in Europe, again, indicating that this was not going to be a costless operation, and it would make more challenging Russia's kind of security environment. And then I said that we should be arming Ukraine kind of to the teeth back then. And the only thing we were willing to do is relatively modest quantities in those earlier days of javelins, and not even Stingers, but eventually Stingers. And we just didn't do any of it. We decided to settle on a policy. And this is something that there should be a reckoning on this issue afterwards. But we decided that we were going to be reactive. And we did that, I think, initially on the basis of a couple of different things. The first one was some unsurety about the fact that this war was coming, even though I think to quite a few analysts, it started to become evident, certainly by January. And we didn't want to precipitate the war. But once it became absolutely certain that the war was coming, to not take actions to warn off Russia was just a major foreign policy failure, I think. The other issues were a perception around who would win and who would lose, and the cost to be borne. If you perceive that Russia would roll over Ukraine within a couple days, if you have this defeatist attitude about victory, Russian victory, why would you risk anything? Why would you, make a much more complex security environment, let your weapons fall into the Russian hands, whatever the case might be, if there was going to be a quick defeat of the Ukrainian forces? And these are the kinds of decisions that drove our policymakers to be reactive. And the only reason that we find ourselves in the world where we are today is because, again, the heroism of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian armed forces changing that discussion. Initially halting Russian attacks, but now presenting the distinct possibility of defeat. And we've been led by, and this is not a bad thing, but we've been led by Ukraine, and we should embrace that and recognize that, Ukraine has set the conditions for all of the things that have unfolded since February 24th.
Thank you.
Alex, sorry, a very, very quick follow up. Is
Yep.
there a red line? Is there a red line, Alex, that that the GRU, the military intelligence component of the Kremlin, and the FSB, is there a red line that Putin can cross that would alienate the FSB and the GRU, which are absolutely critical to what Putin's agenda is?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of this starting to percolate up. I think, in fact, whether it's rational or rationalization, the Russian military believes that its hands have been tied. They certainly believe that they were given false premise by the FSB, false guidance, or terribly bad assumptions by President Putin in shaping the battle plan about what to expect with regards to Ukrainian resistance. That would be the FSB kind of setting some of those conditions and shaping Putin's own vision on this. And I think that is certainly part of the story as to why the plan unfolded the way it did. And the Russian armed forces are taking the heat. They're taking this was an honorable institution, very, very well regarded, and its reputation is in the toilet. Or if it isn't yet, it will be. On the other hand, they have performed quite badly. And this is a good rationalization that the reason that they're having such a hard time is because political actors, FSB, and it doesn't take a GRU to fight with the FSB. That's like a historic issue, the infighting between the FSB and the KGB and the GRU. So I think that it's there. It's starting to percolate up to a certain extent. There have been some folks that watch the intel space and have started to write about it. I don't think it's anything super meaningful just yet, just because Putin has a very, very tight grasp on the elements of repression. But there's still something to be said. It's an area to watch.
All right. Thank you. Colonel Lake.
Thanks. Thank you. My question, and I asked a similar question to General Ryan, but I'm always really interested in what sort of analysis is going on in terms of, potential war termination options here. And so I'm wondering, do you have a sense that there is some good analysis or ideas of potential viable outcomes that would be acceptable to the Ukrainians, that would be acceptable to NATO, and if some of this, this increase in support, this $33 billion that's been committed, is that going to be, used in a way to directly support the path to those desired outcomes? And one small follow-on question to what Mickey was asking there, talking about what we could have done prior. Do you think it would have made any difference if the training missions that were from NATO countries that were on the ground up until early February-ish, would it have changed anything if they had stayed? Thank you.
Thanks, Colonel Lake. So I'll start with that one first. I think we made a terrible. I mean, and I support this administration, and these are unprecedented times with very, very challenging decisions to make. But we made a pretty bad blunder in December when our president declared no boots on the ground. And in reality, there's I think there's a utility in making that kind of claim to indicate to Russia that NATO has no interest, the U.S. has no interest in fighting Russia, And that's something that could have been made clear, in the days before the war. But I think it would have been useful to warn off Russia from conducting this war if, in fact, we were doing, let's say, exercises with the Ukrainians. Um,
Yeah,
we could
that's
have
kind
used
of
that.
makes sense.
That's right. We could
Like
have used
in
this strategic. It would be kind of this idea of strategic ambiguity about what the NATO response would be. I think that would be an important component to. We reintroduce that back into the mix on WMD. It's now kind of stated policy, but by taking NATO troops out of play, I think it really did make the decision for Putin to advance to conduct this war a little bit easier.
Yeah, like I recall, and I know the situation was very different, but during the build up in the spring last year, when when we got the sort of index declaration from Russia around the 21st of April last year, General Homchuk spoke to us at the Multinational Joint Commission and said, you can't underestimate the deterrence role that it played, simply having these NATO soldiers
Yeah.
on the ground and continuing their operations. So I always have that in the back of my mind looking at this, like
Yep.
wondering if it would have changed something. And did we seed the ground? Did we? And I think you're right. The key point is that we made the decision space easier.
We did. I remember talking to the White House in the weeks before this war, and kind of just brainstorming some ideas. And one of the things I said, the Russians were going to try to pulverize the Ukrainian Air Force. Why don't? And this is at the same time that the Russians were getting ready to conduct a exercise with the Belarusians. Wouldn't it have been a perfect excuse for NATO to announce a joint exercise Ukraine, whether it's in the land domain or in the air domain, and have all those air platforms kind of withdraw to NATO territory so they wouldn't be destroyed on the ground in the first several hours. And these things were not even part of the. They were not something that were seriously considered because back then we thought they were impossible. Now they're the easy things to. Everything that we thought was impossible on day one of the war is now easy. Providing heavy weapons, providing artillery, considering unmanned combat aerial vehicles. But back then we had this very, very strange state of mind about some way of returning to normalcy with Russia, hopes of a kind of averting a Cold War. Deeply, deeply misplaced about where that relationship was in reality. But to your other questions, I'll just briefly mention. I think I would hope to see some of that 33 billion go towards outcomes. I'm not certain yet. I have not seen the clear indications that the U.S. is prepared to provide the high tech equipment that Ukraine that would really equalize the battlefield with Russia and its advanced capabilities. Certainly, the way these things work, there's an appropriation, and then the executive branch kind of makes a determination on what to spend the dollars on. So there's a reasonable chance that we might see some of these things announced and flow in, but I'm not sure. It's just a deep reluctance there. With regards to war termination, that's an interesting one. I mean, certainly I get this question a lot, but it's usually from like off ramps and face saving measures for Ukraine, for Russia, and it's to me that's a kind of a dangerous road to go down because Russia would bank whatever you're offering in terms of off ramps and face saving measures, and certainly try to seize something bigger and bolder. And too often we found with Russia is that they'll just reject our overtures out of hand. I think it's up to Putin to determine whether to pursue off ramps and face saving measures, and thus to then be ready to evaluate the utility, the logic, the soundness of accepting any of those offers. But we're past the time of us having to offer something to him. We shouldn't be thinking in that manner. He's the one that should be coming, and he is. We might see that on the 9th, frankly. But in terms of what's acceptable for NATO and Ukraine, I think we're prepared now to start to follow Ukraine's lead in a bigger way. I think we still have this sense of parochialism, and we're likely to tell them, or instruct them on how far they can go, maybe behind the scenes, even kind of warn that we're prepared to meet or support if we think that their ambitions are too large. But I think what's likely to play out is Ukraine is going to, under almost all circumstances at this point, is going to push to establish a status quo ante to February 24th. I think there's even a reasonable possibility that Ukraine may pursue reestablishing territorial integrity over Ukraine, including the Donbass, with the exception of Crimea, which is in a unique status because it's annexed territory. It's Russian territory, and unless Russia does a terrible blunder, which is one of the other options that they could do, is on May 9th they could declare these regions, Russian territory, which would undermine the uniqueness of Crimea's status. I think the discussion around Crimea is likely to be tabled, and I think the Ukrainian leadership is prepared to do that, accept a kind of a different kind of status and a different kind of conversation over Crimea. But I think it's going to push for control of its territory.
Thank you so much.
All right, we've got a question from, we're going to go to Drew has a question, then CJ. Sorry, we're going to have to, we're putting some people down just because we're having a problem getting Colonel Spencer back on. So Peter, we're going to have to get back to you. We're just having a little technical glitch. Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for being here, Colonel Vindman. Really appreciate it. I think so many people in the space kind of expect this war to have some type of conclusion within like 6 months, a year. But frankly, I personally expect it to go on for much longer. And so if the war continues to drag on in Ukraine and it's still happening in, January 2025 and Trump's elected, how do you think that will affect our posture and, what would shift there? And how would that affect the outcome for Ukraine?
Good God, that would be an enormous tragedy for the United States and the whole world. But I don't know if it has to go on that long. Frankly, I think there's such a drastic swing from this war is going to be over in days to the fact that it's going to be to play out over years, and I'm not sure if it needs to go that way, because if you take a look at Russia's combat capabilities, in a lot of ways, it's on the cusp of being a broken force, and with just a little push and nudge with regards to Ukraine being able to settle the score with Russian air power and missile batteries, Ukraine can get there and basically, disable in a lot of ways the Russian armed forces. If Russia doesn't feel like it's been sufficiently punished, and on May 9th either pursues a partial mobilization or a general mobilization, then we are in for a long war. It's going to take Russia months to reconstitute its forces. It's going to take quite some time for Russia's going to try to hold its positions. It's going to take it some time to build offensive capability. And then it has to contend with safe havens for the Ukrainian armed forces, safe havens for equipment pouring in, like the notion of proxy warfare. And I think it gets extremely dangerous well before 2025, probably within the next 6 months or a year, as Russia's objectives are stymied, where it lashes out and potentially lashes out at NATO. And we find ourselves, within a year in a war, because Russia looks for different ways, different vulnerabilities to warn off NATO. That's more likely to me than maybe it's some wishful thinking, than a Trump leading this war effort scenario, because I could see getting into the 2024 election cycle. I don't know. I could see Trump, because of the spirit of the American people is behind the support for Ukraine, rhetorically saying that he's supporting Ukraine, that he's a strong leader. But in reality, I think once he becomes president, he'll look for ways to, reconcile with Vladimir Putin, who he admires deeply.
All right, Alex, we've got John back in. He's able to get in. So John, go ahead.
Hey, Alex, thanks for joining us, brother. It's really good to hear from you. I'm learning a lot. So my question was, one, I don't agree that this will go on for years. I just don't see that scenario playing out. My question is, and I know you have strong beliefs on what else could be given to Ukraine within the understandable political, tripwire red lines on both sides. What else could we, as in the West, be giving Ukraine that we're not?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to recognize is that this is a sophisticated force, well led militarily and well led by a political class. So if we want to be partners, if we want to be strategic partners, that was the kind of the term of art with regards to our relationship with Ukraine. Then that requires an element of trust. If we do have that kind of trust, then we could probably give them just about anything, with the understanding that they don't use those capabilities to target kind of strategic Russian assets, go after the Kremlin. But even if we don't have that trust, there's a lot we could be doing. If we were to offer HIMARS, we don't have to offer the same kinds of capabilities that allow them to strike strategic targets. We could instead offer them the kind of that ATACMS capability, the 300 kilometer range, or if I recall correctly. We could offer them Gray Eagles if we're not prepared to offer them Reapers. Gray Eagles have a 300 nautical mile range, a payload of 4 Hellfire missiles. We could offer them that class of equipment. We could offer them some platforms that could carry small diameter bombs that have a nice kind of glide capability to hit targets pretty deep. We could offer some more capabilities with regards to coastal defense cruise missiles, medium and long range air defense. Those are defensive capabilities, and then figure out how to acquire for them medium and long range kind of anti-armor capabilities like loiter munitions and things of that nature. Those are all things that we have not yet done. We have provided some pretty good capabilities now with artillery and armor coming through from various kind of donors. But all those things I laid out are not yet in play.
Is there a follow-up there, John?
No, I 100% agree. This is about ranges, and even all the fancy talk of like the switchblades and all that. People have to understand the range of these systems, and we need to be able to push the Ukrainian military's range and lethality farther out.
Yeah, I would say if we give them something within the 300 kilometer range category, they could go after some, let's say, strategic targets in terms of strategic morale targets. Like they go after the Kerch Bridge with that kind of range. They go after airfields in Crimea or in done in the Rostov, like right across the border in Russia. They go after those types of things, but that wouldn't give them the capability to go after kind of strategic targets or target all the way out to Moscow. So I think those are, even if we didn't have a trust in our strategic partner, we could offer lots of different capabilities that could extend their range and go after these systems that allow Russia to sustain war.
All right. So we've got CJ. He's one of our resident arty SMEs. All sorts of clever, and I won't get into his background, but I think you can imagine there, Colonel Vindman. So CJ, you had a good question.
Hey, Colonel Vindman. Good to talk to you. Captain Drew. I'm a field artillery officer, U.S. Army, experienced with the 173rd and 75th Ranger Regiment. My question is sort of very Army focused because you've had a great distinguished career in the Army. And really, you've mentioned a couple times about how the Russian military is showing so many deficiencies and so many issues. I guess, what do you think Army officers should be taking away from all that? I spent my first couple years in Germany training to fight the Russians, and it turned out we were almost overtraining maybe. But I guess, what military capabilities did you see while you're in Moscow or stationed in Europe that really makes you think that they're still a force to be reckoned with in some way?
So I think, it's interesting. I was responsible. The reason I went to the Pentagon, after Moscow is because I had kind of firsthand experience watching, part of this war unfold in 2014-15, observing and reporting on Russian activities from the Russian side of the border back then. And the things that I was picking up on that worried me was the fact that the Russians were really effective at using UAVs to employ fires. We're reluctant. We want like an observer. For some reason we for a long time insisted on an observer on the ground to make sure that there was no civilians, no collateral damage. The Russians were unencumbered by those types of considerations. I was concerned about electronic warfare capabilities degrading our ability to communicate. Those things seemed pretty apparent. EW, they have a sophisticated suite of capabilities. I understood that the Russian kind of national level exercises were well rehearsed. So when you see like a combination of air power, artillery, and maneuver on those kind of set piece stages, that was not the whole story. But I also saw the Russians conduct some kind of live fire exercises. I saw students get drilled real hard in the academies on artillery and things of that nature. So I thought that these things were important capabilities that they could bring to bear against the U.S. And there's the trick here is not to assume that the Russian army is 10 feet tall, but also not to kind of accept him to be a dwarf and irrelevant. We need to have a better appraisal. And to a certain extent, the way we do that is, in this case, we probably learned a lot from this campaign, how the Ukrainians fought. We probably need to have more folks on the ground. That's, to me, I'm an infantryman. I was an infantryman for 10 years before I became a foreign area officer. And that kind of on the ground feel is something hard to explain. I would like to see, more of our folks kind of rotate through, especially as this war winds down, the Yavoriv training areas, basically partnering with the Ukrainians and having those kinds of exchanges. That's the way we could learn a lot about the Russians, how the Ukrainians fought them, and then at the same time understand that the way this war unfolded, at least initially, so poorly, was based on just false assumptions. We in the military, as you know, CJ, talk about valid and necessary assumptions. The assumptions that the Russian military drew partially from the political class was on the basis that the Ukrainians would surrender, they wouldn't resist, and that probably drove a lot of the way that the Russian military kind of arrayed itself, looked to do a kind of lightning strike around cities, didn't worry about logistics, didn't worry about securing the territory between their forward line of troops and their rear areas and things of that nature. So I don't know. We'll have to figure out how much of this is just kind of systemic, the lack of NCO leadership, lack of kind of mission command type of thinking. The initiative that the Ukrainians have in abundance, the Russians lack. We'll have to kind of study some of those things, but there are still plenty of people that will tell you that the Russians have a lot of capability.
Thank you for that. I just want to take the moment to thank you and just remind the room of Mriya Aid and appreciate Colonel Vindman's support. As you can tell, many of the stakeholders at Mriya Aid were either intimately involved in training Ukrainian forces and having that experience. If you could, if you're in a position to assist us, we really do appreciate it. We've taken help from people in specific fields, whether people are volunteering their time. Every cent that is sent to us is donated to purchase equipment, non-lethal aid, humanitarian aid, drones, NVGs, and the like. And thank you for standing behind that, Colonel Vindman.
Of course.
So we really appreciate it. And as you can see, we have a wide variety of experts who've come to help in the information war. I mean, this, as many of the panelists have said already, this is the first war it's live and it's relevant to everyone. I mean, we could pontificate as to why other wars haven't been as important or as spotlighted, and that says something about our cultures and societies, and that's a conversation for another day. But with regards to the information war, we have Ina, one of our panelists, Colonel Vindman. She's a reporter for Norway's largest media outlet, and she has a question for you about this information. Go ahead, Ina.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Colonel Vindman. Yeah, regarding the Russian propaganda and, the disinformation that is being used as a weapon in this war and, quite frankly, in our society, what do you think we can do to counter the matter of false information and propaganda?
Sure. Well, first, let me reinforce this good work that Mriya Aid's doing, and I think we should all kind of understand that civil society has been absolutely critical with regards to enabling Russia's success. At times arming the Russian armed forces, but certainly with regards to the territorial defense forces. And Joe, I might be able to take one more question because I have to hop. But with regards to the information environment, it's something that bothered me for a long, long time, that Russia, because it didn't have to adhere to kind of any values and could lie at will, had the edge in terms of attempting to use the fire hose of falsehoods, as it's been written about, and just try a bunch of different messages, see which one's going to be most effective, and then exploiting success. And that governments in the West couldn't do the same thing, and it wasn't really all that effective to kind of attempt to deny or explain. But I also recognize in that same breath that Russia was generally accepted as the bad guy and the West was accepted as the good guy. So with government to government kind of interactions, it seemed like it lopsided in favor of Russia. But in terms of like who was perceived to be a good actor, who's perceived to be a bad actor, I think that there was always the advantages were towards the West. Now we have, I think, a very, very different environment. Russia has been shown to be, barbarous, inhumane, and I think that there's very little that Russia can do in the near future to kind of undo the damage and of this war. I think there are other things there. We still have to learn the lesson of how to compete with, let's say, China and other regimes that haven't proven themselves to be kind of, identified and synonymous with evil. And we still have those kind of issues between governments that are apt to lie and governments that are, that are going to do the best to adhere to Western values. But it's not something, frankly, that we need to be super concerned about with Russia. And in a lot of ways, I think Ukraine has shown, directed us in the right area, which is that Russia's falsehoods could be overwhelmed by just general information sharing. So when Russia tries to kind of propagate some sort of falsehood, there is in fact, you turn up the volume on the other side, as President Zelensky has done so effectively in Ukraine, and really drowned out that nonsense. And having firsthand accounts, on the ground accounts, video footage, whatever the case might be, is proven to be very, very effective on putting Russia on its heels with regards to the information war.
Thanks so much, Alex. We've got John has the last question for you. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for your time and for your commitment to Mriya Aid. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you back soon. Here you go, John. Thanks.
Alex, hopefully a quick question. What's your bold and audacious prediction for the next couple of weeks and months in the war?
Yep. So I think this one's actually pretty easy. Ukraine's going to win. Russia's going to lose. Certainly in this current phase of the war, where Russia is going after more limited aims, it's still fighting on a 900-kilometer frontage. and it has somewhere between 70, 73, maybe 90 battalion tactical groups. If you were to put them all online, like in a defense, they could cover 90 kilometers out of a 900-kilometer frontage. So a defensive kind of positional war component to this is going to be insanely difficult for them. In this, the waning days of this offense, where they're trying to achieve some breakthroughs, the Russians have impossible odds. The Ukrainians have run a very sophisticated, savvy defense in depth, mobile defense in depth, not allowing themselves to be encircled. And while Russia kind of continues to break its combat power so I think, it's possible things could somehow still change. Russia could pull a rabbit out of the hat and, find the commander that allows them to achieve some breakthroughs. But they're not going to be able to get very far just because they've suffered such enormous losses. And Ukraine is getting replenished with all sorts of goodies. So we're going to find ourselves in a position where Russia is going to have to go on a defense. It's going to be a porous defense. Russia is going to get punished. And it's really going to have to kind of go down to some much, much smaller gains. And I think those gains are possibly kind of the boundaries of the LNR and DNR on the 24th of February, and some holds to secure a land bridge in the south. That might be the best that Russia is able to do, and then try to sue for peace.
Well, thank you very much. Any follow-up there? Sorry, John?
No. Thanks, brother. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Sir, thank you so much for supporting us and being here. We realize your time is very valuable. And again, I'd like everyone, if you could go and check out Colonel Vindman's Twitter handle there. I have read his book. Amazing. And truly, I don't want to wax hyperbolic, but an American patriot. Thank you for everything that you do. And we hope to see you on Mriya Aid again whenever you can. Thank you so much.
Thank you.